Welcome to Superpuzzle Developments, where we talk about how to launch your wealth, health, and peace, both individually and collectively. But I would say that this program has a little more emphasis on what we can do if we work together collectively. So maybe personally, sorry, I had to turn off the live stream there. Personally, you have a personal success puzzle and a business success puzzle. And then collectively, your puzzle pieces can fit into a larger super puzzle. So today what I want to do is unpack the concept of a super puzzle. And I won't be doing too much screen sharing today, but I will do a little bit of screen sharing. So if you're just listening to the podcast, I don't think you'll miss out too much for the visuals today, but just keep in mind that we do have the live stream in the video version of this. And shout out to those of you tuning in live or checking out the podcast. Okay, which is the recorded version of what we're doing here. So first, what I'd like to do is start us off with how I got introduced to the concept of a super puzzle, which was from the author, a really important person to me, probably one of my favorite authors, maybe my favorite author of all time, actually, Mark Hamilton. And he has a body of nonfiction work, and there's a really interesting story behind this author and his Society of Readers, which I'm a member of. And I'm going to get into it a little bit today, but not too much. We'll save that for another episode. But he has a large body of like a real life story. He has a large body of nonfiction work. And then also he has a factional trilogy, like an epic factional trilogy on par. Personally, I would say better, but on par with things that people are familiar with, such as the Harry Potter series or the Skywalker saga in Star Wars, or the Lord of the Rings, or these epic, trilogies, or like in the case of Star Wars, it kind of lines up nicely with this factional work that I'm talking about right now, which is actually titled Superpuzzle, because it's broken into 3 parts, and then each of those 3 parts is 3 parts. And I'm actually going to go over it a little bit with you. So when I was a teenager and I was still in high school, this might have been like around 2005 or so, I was introduced by my grandfather to Mark Hamilton's work. And my grandfather, I think, maybe didn't even have this book yet, but an earlier version of it was online at the time, thanks to Mark Hamilton's father, largely, I think, who was really pushing to put a lot of their literature, it's like an amazing family of writers, on online. So a lot of stuff was available. Mark Hamilton's father, Dr. Frank R. Wallace, was actually uploading his edits in real time, and some people were tracking that back then. And I found an earlier draft of the story. Eventually, my grandfather was invited to get the full version. But I started reading that when I was still in high school, and I'm going to go over what the story is with you. At the time, I think the earlier draft I found was just called The Story. And when my grandfather got it, I think it was called Miss Annabelle's Secrets, which I will explain here in a moment. And nowadays, we just call it Superpuzzle, the Superpuzzle, the Neo-Think Superpuzzle. Neo-Think is a word you're going to hear a lot around here with me and with what we're doing here with the live streams. Oh, I should mention, by the way, that after these streams, we're also doing spaces on X if you want to interact, and we're trying to keep with the topic of the super puzzles. So I'm going to sort of set us up for those future conversations today, and as time goes on, when we're talking about the super puzzle, how do we put all that stuff together? So to kick us off, I want to take a look at the book that in its current form today that millions of people have read, and some of you tuning in maybe have access to this. And this is how I was introduced to the concept of a super puzzle. And then after looking at this, we're going to talk to ChatGPT, and we're going to see basically like, what does the world think that a superpuzzle is, and I'll give some additional commentary, and then that's probably going to close us out for today. My additional commentary is going to be more about, okay, here's a factional story, which means that there's fictional characters and storyline, but it's based on a factual line of logic. So in Mark Hamilton's case, the factual line of logic is all of the nonfiction works that back up what's depicted in the story, what's described with the fictional characters and the fictional storyline. And there's a lot of faction that has gone into it. So if you look, but there is some fictional characters and storylines. So when I read that as a teenager, and then I was looking at the world, I was wondering, okay, what's the real life version of this? Who are the real life characters and organizations that are doing things that remind me of what I read about in the book? And so I lived my whole adult life with that kind of worldview, looking at the world that way and making correlations and stuff like that to things that remind me of what are in these books, especially the one I'm about to show you a little bit about. And then if we look at the world today, about what the world thinks a superpuzzle is, especially if this is a word that I want to try to use out there to see if people grab onto it, and maybe get them interested in reading the what we would call the factional trilogy and also the nonfiction books that go along with it. What is the real life version in the real world today? So that's going to be most of what my commentary is going to be based around, and how to get involved with people like me and others who you might also see on the X Spaces who are interested in these kinds of things. So to kick us off, before we go to ChatGPT, let's take a look at the book. So here we're looking at the table of contents and part 1. So the title is the Superpuzzle, or Neothink Superpuzzle. Neothink is a new way of thinking and living, a new way of using the mind, the mentality of the more evolved human that we're evolving into right now. You could say a superhuman, as I've been talking about on Mondays, or you could say a God man, if that's a word that you're open to. But basically, just a more evolved human being, conscious, human-like consciousness, has a more advanced mentality. And this is the mentality that we're evolving into, which is all based on self-leadership and your ability to do integrated thinking and to integrate reality honestly, which is a very important skill nowadays. So what you're looking at, if you are looking at the screen, part 1 of the way Mark Hamilton has organized this factional trilogy is conceiving the superpuzzle. And this is where the secret society begins. And the story actually begins, I'm going to try not to give away too many spoilers here. The story begins with a 3rd grade teacher who, of course, has a backstory. Her name is Miss Annabelle. And she has this miracle year, which is part of the structure of part 1 here. It's broken into 3 sections. And the miracle year is basically the first of, you could say, 9 sections of the book, or nine movies, if you wanted to look at it that way. Again, kind of drawing the parallel to something like the Skywalker saga in Star Wars, which has 9 main movies in the canon there. So in this miracle year, she has one miracle year teaching 3rd grade students, 8 and then 9-year-olds as the year goes on, and she helps them break into this new mentality. And then some stuff happens, and she's separated from them for about 27 years, and then they're reunited thanks to one of the main characters in the story that kind of sparks it all. This young college student, Jake Ketchings, who 27 years later noticed some things, the way that the story starts off with a New Year's theme. And he got curious and he started digging around, and it ultimately led him to playing a instrumental role in getting Miss Annabelle back together with her students. And then they basically kind of pick up where they were left off in before they were separated, which was before they were separated, they had sort of conceived this Superpuzzle, and it had kind of culminated at the end of the school year. And so after they're reunited as the children being adults, they swing into action, picking up where they left off, basically as kind of like soulmates, is how they feel about each other, especially after that that evolution that they went through together, and the amazing connection that they still had in the way that they felt about each other and their teacher all those years later. That leads them into the actions of putting together the pieces. So the secret society reunites, and then the part 3 is beholding the puzzle picture, and that's where the secret society triumphs. So if we look at it, and maybe I'll share a little word from the author about part 1 here, but I don't really want to give spoilers on the other parts today. So a word from the author, Mark Hamilton, is, it's true. There are now a handful of immortals on Earth which have been kept secret. They are Earth's first immortals, and they reside deep within the Society of Secrets, or the Neothink Society, you could say. Members within the Neothink Society join Earth's first immortals each year. In fact, that has been the secret mission of the world's most powerful secret society for the past 4 decades. The story that follows takes you deep inside the highly guarded inner circle of the Neothink Society, deep into the heart of the Neothink Society, into its secret mission. I tell you the story from the beginning, starting when Earth's first immortals were just children, when the Superpuzzle was conceived, in order to communicate this story that involves explicit details deep inside the highly guarded walls of a secret society. Mark says, I had to develop a new writing form, which I call faction. Faction is not a new word, but I'm creating a new definition. Faction puts the fact into fiction, faction. But the factional story in your hands does much more than simply blend facts with fiction. It builds an unbroken line of logic based on the facts, which defines faction. Although the storyline can cross over into fiction, the line of logic is pure nonfiction. Faction was the only way I could bring to you the ongoing, greatest kept secret of all time. Indeed, faction was the only way I could bring you the goings on deep within the world's most powerful secret society, and expose the details of its most secret mission, bringing us Earth's first immortals. So for people who do join the Neothink Society, this is a kind of, I don't want to say it's an intro tool. It is an intro tool. There is a certain way that you get introduced to the books, and Mark Hamilton has tried all different kinds of ways of doing that over the years. But basically, most people nowadays, because the society has existed for generations, for decades, it's basically like 55 years old this year. So millions of people have gotten these books over the years, and this is one of the newer books that just became available maybe in the early 2000s, if I'm not mistaken, the completed version of it, when my grandfather got access to it. And this body of work is what pretty much all members read in the beginning. A lot of members, this might have been their first book, and it might have really hooked them to get into the nonfiction works. And the reason why Mark Hamilton created this factional story was because what he realized was, in terms of the family and their formula to approach this really novel breakthrough approach, a super genius breakthrough approach, as we talk about on Fridays, to curing aging and death, to biological immortality, which is part of the ultimate goal of the Neothink Society. This formula involved creating a lot of the literature so that the world could be articulated, the mentality, the different structures of civilization could be articulated. However, seeing it is not enough. People have to also feel it to want it. And so this story is very emotionally gripping, And I've met so many people over the years that have just been super impacted by it. And if you do read it from start to finish, it would really hook you to get into the nonfiction books. And I highly recommend all of Mark Hamilton's literature. And shout out to any of you who are familiar with Mark Hamilton's literature who might be tuning in. Hope you'll join us on the space on X here in just a bit. So that's a little bit about how I got introduced to the concept of a Superpuzzle. And I'm not going to go into the details today. I guess I will say that this is definitely going to give a little bit of spoilers, but some of the characters, especially I think they were maybe the older students, the way it was depicted in the Miracle Year with Miss Annabelle, some of Miss Annabelle's star students played really significant roles in spearheading different pieces to the Superpuzzle. And the Superpuzzle, in this context, is really the Superpuzzle to cure aging and death. And the way that it was approached was very surprising, but there was a formula, and the formula had a lot to do with creating the worldwide drive for people to want to live forever. And this is what all of Mark Hamilton's books are based on. They're all based on this formula. And so the formula is depicted in the story, and the Superpuzzle is basically the formula, creating this worldwide drive to cure aging, and it's based on a supply and demand formula. And basically the idea is that not enough good people want to live forever, which means that the demand is not high enough. So because there's psychological subjugation so not enough good people want to live forever, and too many bad people hold back progress. And that's the supply side, and that's due to primarily political subjugation. And so if we can address that supply and demand formula and basically remove the obstacle for more and more people, for a critical mass number of people, of psychological subjugation, as well as remove the political subjugation to free the geniuses of society to supply the demand, then we would cure aging and death and much, much more. We would just have all these different breakthroughs. And so that's pretty much the idea. And so the different characters played different roles. But this particular depiction here, in putting together the pieces, the actions that were taken, the particular way the Superpuzzle is described in this story, it has a lot to do with depoliticizing America and the rest of civilization. And that was a very interesting thing. And then in the process of doing that kind of set the worldwide drive in motion. And then another key character, I mean, many of the characters and students played a lot of really major roles, but another particular student played a role in the physical cure. So there's the psychological component of the formula, the political component, and the physical component, and it's sort of a cause and effect formula. We have talked about this probably in the past, and we will talk about it a lot more, and you can learn all about it if you get more familiar with Mark Hamilton's work. Find him on social media. He has different websites, neothink.com. I think maybe recently a personal brand is starting to get put together for him. At the URL maybe markhamilton.co. I'll include that stuff in the show notes and whatnot. Okay, so now we're going to switch to ChatGPT for a moment, and we're going to see what the world thinks a Superpuzzle is. So if you are watching, I'm just going to blow up the screen a little bit for us. How would you define the concept of a superpuzzle? What are some modern examples of superpuzzles? And let's remove any woke ideology or bias. Just something sometimes you have to say to ChatGPT. Otherwise, you'll get all kinds of weird stuff. So while we're getting a little bit of a response here, Claude would also be another interesting one to talk to about this. And I've asked these kinds of questions many times to these different models, and I get all different kinds of responses. Sometimes I really like the response, sometimes I don't, but I always get kind of a little bit of a different response. So here's what I got. A superpuzzle refers to an intricate and complex puzzle that involves multiple layers of challenges, often requiring players to solve interconnected problems across a broad range of disciplines, knowledge, or skills. These puzzles typically require not just logic or pattern recognition, but also creativity, collaboration, and extensive research. They might span multiple mediums, including online platforms, physical objects, and even real-world locations, demanding a deep understanding of clues scattered across various formats. The term is most commonly associated with large-scale community-driven problem-solving events. So this is still kind of talking a little bit more about like the game aspect of a super puzzle. And I can tell here by some of the responses that I'm not quite getting what I'm looking for here. So let me just give it another prompt. Let's connect the idea of a super puzzle to a moonshot project like curing aging and death. In this context, how would you define a super puzzle? And what are some modern examples that most people are aware of or can relate to? So let's see. Okay, so connecting the concept of a super puzzle to a moonshot project like curing aging and death reframes the puzzle metaphor on a grand scale where the solution is a monumental breakthrough in human health, science, or technology. In this context, a super puzzle would be defined as a vast interdisciplinary challenge involving multiple fields of study, societal factors, and technological hurdles that need to be solved collaboratively over time. And collaboratively is kind of what I was getting to at the beginning there, of a difference between, like you putting together your personal success puzzle or your business success puzzle. And that's kind of unique to you, but your puzzle is part of a larger super puzzle if you are keen and would like it to be. So let's see. Defining a super puzzle in the context of curing aging and death. A super puzzle in this scenario also refers to the enormous complex problem of understanding and reversing the biological processes of aging and death. It involves breaking the problem down into numerous layers or smaller puzzles across various domains of science and engineering, such as cellular biology and genetics, unraveling the mechanisms that cause cells to age and die, such as telomere shortening, mitochondrial dysfunction, and DNA damage. Biotechnology, developing technologies like CRISPR and gene therapy to reverse or slow aging at the genetic level. Nanotechnology, engineering tiny machines that could repair damage at the cellular level, remove toxins, or regenerate tissues. Pharmaceutical and therapeutic innovations, creating drugs or therapies that prevent aging-related diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's, and heart disease. And then there's also the ethical and societal considerations, which to me is a little bit of the woke agenda. So I'll just read this as an example of the things you have to kind of filter for when you're looking at the way the world views these things. Addressing the social, economic, and ethical implications of extending human life indefinitely, such as overpopulation, resource distribution, and quality of life. So this is something to consider from the perspective of why isn't human life the preservation and protection of human life not the most valuable thing in people's moral compass. That's the first ethical consideration. And the societal consideration, I guess, would be how much better could the world be if we did extend human life indefinitely, especially if we are becoming superhumans in a super society full of super genius breakthroughs, ultimately enjoying an entirely new, different kind of civilization that we refer to here as a super civilization. Is overpopulation really an issue, or is that just something that's been manufactured, a narrative? Characteristics of this super puzzle: multidisciplinary, collaborative, layered, complexity, iterative, and long-term. So I'll just share a couple of these, and then we'll look at maybe some other modern examples. Let's see here. I'm not really happy with the response that I got from ChatGPT on this one. So in terms of multidisciplinary, again, this is according to like the world that models like ChatGPT have access to. This is not what I believe or think, or the approach that we're taking, like with Mark Hamilton in the Neo-Think Society. So in terms of multidisciplinary, it spans biology, medicine, technology, ethics, law, and economics, requiring expertise from diverse fields. And this is probably more about the physical cure, but the thing that's so breakthrough about Mark Hamilton's approach is that it doesn't really start at all with the physical cure. The physical cure is ironically, the easiest, as long as we handle the overcome, I guess is a better way to say, the psychological subjugation and the political subjugation. For collaborative, no single organization or nation can solve this puzzle alone, which is maybe debatable. It will require global collaboration between governments, private industries, and academic institutions. So nowadays, maybe governments just need to get out of the way. Private industries need to be free to soar, like the geniuses of society, the value creators. Maybe private industries has a tainted connotation to it nowadays. And the academic institutions maybe can support this initiative, but in many cases, people sort of just need to get out of the way. That would allow the collaboration to naturally happen. And then we have layered complexity. Solutions to smaller problems, such as curing specific diseases, are stepping stones to the larger goal of extending human life. That makes sense. And then we have the iterative and long-term. It won't be solved with one breakthrough. Instead, it will require an accumulation of many smaller innovations over decades or even centuries. And the point that Mark Hamilton makes in his work is that we could actually do this in less than a decade if enough people shake off the psychological subjugation, and if we somehow create the conditions one way or another, depoliticizing or through some other means. I'll speak about one of those in just a moment. If we allow the geniuses of society to do what they do without having the political subjugation holding them down, then we will have it probably within our lifetime, within this decade. And so centuries is just unrealistic unless we continue to be suppressed in an anti-civilization. And then there's some modern examples that relate to the super puzzle of curing aging and death. So these are some of the tangible projects and advancements that people may be familiar with, which fit into the larger super puzzle. But again, this is sort of just more relating to the physical cure. So there's CRISPR and gene editing, and there's senolytics. There's what Calico's doing. That's Google's anti-aging research company. There's Aubrey de Grey and the SENS Research Foundation, which is strategies for engineered negligible senescence. And there's AI in drug discovery. There's longevity startups, which I'm really bullish on. There's the Human Genome Project. So these are all components, and ChatGPT is kind of connecting them to how they might relate, how each piece might be part of a larger super puzzle. And I think there's a lot missing from the list here. This wasn't like a super prompt or anything like that. I would encourage you actually to talk to your AI models about these kinds of things and see where you can get with it. I've had much better responses than what we got today. So why it's a super puzzle? The challenge of curing aging and death is a super puzzle because it involves unknown knowns. Many aspects of aging are still not fully understood. As scientists unlock one layer of the problem, new questions and obstacles arise, making it an evolving and iterative process. Then you have cross-disciplinary expertise. It's not just about biology. That's what I was speaking to a moment ago that Mark Hamilton figured out a long time ago. Solving the puzzle also requires advancements in AI, computational biology, nanotechnology, and ethical policy making. This is interesting thing to have their ethical policy making. Global and long-term commitment. This is not a puzzle that can be solved by a single breakthrough. It requires sustained effort across generations and international borders. So in sum, the concept of a super puzzle is the context of a moonshot-like project, such as curing aging and death. And in this case, it's about addressing a seemingly impossible challenge through the culminative solution of numerous smaller interconnected problems. The path to success involves collaboration, innovation, and persistence across a wide array of fields, making it both a scientific and societal endeavor. So there's so much more that you can probably get out there looking at the concept of a super puzzle. There are like actual games, like super puzzle games and stuff like that. And I do encourage us to look at the idea of the super puzzle as a game. But really, it's if you connect it to things like moonshot style projects that have a paradigm shifting impact on all of humanity and civilization as a whole, or at least a massive number of people, that's kind of what we're talking about. So if you take all these different structures of civilization, these different paradigm shifts that are changing, all these different breakthroughs, puzzle, pretty good sized puzzle pieces on their own, and connect them all together, you get a super puzzle. And really the super puzzle is really our journey, just like Mark Hamilton has described and titled his book. It's really our journey from the old mentality in the old world, the following mode mentality, easily manipulated by external authorities and relying on external authorities for guidance, living in an anti-civilization. And then the new, that's what the old world is, the anti-civilization. And then the new world is in juxtaposition to the anti-civilization. It's the super civilization. It's the exact opposite mentality, where we have self-leaders, we have internal guidance. We're no longer relying on external guidance for our survival, and we're no longer stuck in a survival state. I've been using the term degens versus regens, and how we basically are going, whether you like it or not. If you're dying and you're in survival mode biologically, you are a degen. You're literally degenerating, and you might not be degenerating as much as someone else, but in the grand scheme of things, your lifespan, your health span is not that significantly better or different. We really need a breakthrough to bring us into a regenerative state. It's one thing to say that the body is capable of regenerating. It's another thing to demonstrate it, like in a significant way. So what's interesting about a lot of the research that's happening for anti-aging and curing aging and death and biological immortality and that kind of stuff, one thing that's interesting is the emphasis on biology is, there's like this transhumanism agenda, and a lot of people are kind of moving in the direction of like cyborg sort of stuff. That's not super appealing to me. I'm open to it. I sometimes call it like human 2.0, and I wonder if we have to go through human 2.0 to get to human 3.0, which would be maybe more biological. Like, look at this $1 trillion device that we can't even create. We don't even have enough energy and processing power to fully use it. Everything that's capable of, it's so much better than all of our computer science stuff. The computer science is really just kind of helping us understand what we already have to work with here. But it seems like a lot of the research doesn't really take into account how important human consciousness and the human biology and organism is and what we're doing. There seems to be sort of an anti-human agenda going on, which is probably par and course for what an anti-civilization would do, but that's not really our future, so we don't have to be too concerned with those kind of approaches. I just don't think that they're really going to solve the problem because I'm not sure that they're asking the right questions. Regarding the ethical and societal considerations, they seem to be stuck in the moral, psychological structure that death is acceptable, and that maybe the radical life extension is really only for like a select elite few. It's not, like if you can pay for it, and if you're part of the club, maybe you can have it, but otherwise, it's not really for everyone, because we have to consider what about the ethical societal considerations of overpopulation. So it's kind of fascinating. I hope a lot of people are not falling for those illusions. But with that said, let's talk about the real life and the real world version of the Superpuzzle. It's kind of hard to have this conversation with people that haven't read Mark Hamilton's books, because if you have read his books, it's just so much easier to have a shared language and an idea of what the real life Superpuzzle might be like. But if you can imagine where we are right now, where the majority of the people in the world have this degen mentality, and to varying degrees, and we predominantly live in an anti-civilization, and the extremeness of the anti-civilization is a little more prevalent in certain locations more than others, but no matter what, we can't escape it. We're all collectively, we're all kind of somewhat tied to it. However, because of this evolution of our mentality, which is mostly being caused by the survival pressures of the anti-civilization, more and more people are waking up, and we are becoming more, we're moving toward more of this regen mentality, the self-leader mentality, as I was saying. And that new mentality, the more evolved mentality, almost completing our evolution, you could say, that is bringing about a new civilization, which we call the super civilization, in parallel. And so as less mentalities support the anti-civilization, because they're waking up and beginning to more dominantly support the super civilization, the anti-civilization continues to crumble, which then causes more people to wake up, which makes the super civilization stronger. And so we're at a point right now where the anti-civilization is still more dominant, but it does look like maybe we're in a domino effect collapse where nobody can stop this evolution. Thus, nobody can stop the emergence of the super civilization and the collapse of the anti-civilization, because there's just less and less. So at a certain point, we will reach a flippening, kind of like if you think about Ethereum flipping Bitcoin in the crypto markets, or Bitcoin flipping gold for market cap or something like that, or crypto flipping, fiat currency, if that's even a possible comparison. Maybe it's easier for those of you familiar with crypto to think about, would Ethereum ever flip Bitcoin? That's something that's talked about. So that's not really the point of what I'm making. I'm just trying to give you a way to relate to it when I say the flippening. So eventually the super civilization will become more dominant, where we'll have a larger, not market share, maybe market share, but more so a mind share. And it's really just a numbers game. It's hard to know what the actual population is, because it's hard to trust the organizations that collect the data and put out the numbers. But presumably we're headed toward 10 billion people on the planet. And so we would need to reach a tipping point on our way there, where we have a critical mass number of people that have a greater level of consciousness, that are anchoring us into the super civilization. And that would, if we could reach enough people, that will create a drive where people will start to be magnetized to the new world. Just like how people, again, going back to the crypto example, some people paved the way. They were the pioneers, the innovators for things like Bitcoin and various cryptocurrencies. And a lot of other people just didn't care, weren't aware, didn't pay attention. But eventually the ball of energy got big enough where it started to magnetize more and more people and started to become household names, and more and more people became aware. And that's just kind of the bell curve evolution of adoption that things go through. And so our real life super puzzle in the real world, I do think, has a lot to do with people adopting the new mentality and really embracing it, and people building the new structures of the new world so that we can enjoy it. So the new mentality is going to be very attractive to people. It's probably the only product that everyone is eventually going to want and need, or they will die. As blunt as that sounds, that's kind of the choice that you have. It's basically be a regen and live and thrive, or die as a degen. And it's basically your choice. You're making it moment to moment. And right now, if we do the right things long enough consistently, all you really have to avoid doing is just stay alive. Don't die in the next, 5 or 10 years, because we're getting pretty close to some radical paradigm shifts happening where at the very least you could radically extend your lifestyle. And while we're making the full, completion of our evolution. And if I was going to super summarize the super puzzle myself personally, I would say that Curing Aging and Death is actually just a major milestone toward going from a type 0 civilization to a type 1 civilization. And that's a reference to things like the Kardashev scale of civilizations. And there's different ways of defining it. I would define it as a type 0 civilization is an anti-civilization, and a type 1 civilization is a super civilization. And a way that I would maybe explain this, I don't know if it's a perfect example, but if you're familiar with video games like the Zelda games, a lot of times in a game like Zelda, you start off in the game as the main character Link. And then Link is in the forest in his home, and you start to get some basic storyline, and there's little like missions or quests that you have to complete in the forest. And it's like the training ground, basically. It's how you get the storyline for the game, and it's how you learn the basics of how to play the game. And until you complete whatever your mission is in the forest, you do not get to leave the forest, and where the rest of the map opens up and you get to play the actual game. So in many ways, we as a type 0 civilization, as an anti-civilization, we are not really even in the game yet until we go from 0 to 1. So we have to evolve into this new mentality. We have to birth a super civilization and get it to be desirable and feasible and viable and adaptable enough that it basically surpasses the anti-civilization. And I do believe that this is going to happen regardless. I think the question is the timing. How could we accelerate and speed it up? Do we really need to wait the longest amount of time for things to fully take into effect, or can we kind of co-create it into existence a lot faster and enjoy it a lot sooner than later, especially since we are up against the clock when it comes to our biology? So I think Curing Aging and Death is just one of it's like the first big reward that we get for progressing significantly into a super civilization. And then the real game begins. It's almost like we've just been in the training ground and we haven't even been playing the actual game yet. Much like the character Link in the forest in Zelda, and then the map opens up and you can begin to play the actual game. So hopefully that made a little bit of sense. And what I'd like to talk about coming up soon in the space on X, and I think we'll end it here so we can take a break for that, is what are the developments that are happening in the real life Superpuzzle? So over the last week or so, there has been a new development on my radar, something coming from Mark Hamilton and the NeoThink Society that I would like to chat about in the X space, but we can also chat about other things that are related to the real life Superpuzzle in the real world. And what are you doing to play your part in it, and what can others do? What's maybe the power approach to the situation, of all the actions that can be taken, the things that people can do to collaborate, what are the single most important, most valuable and powerful things that are actually going to move us closer from where we are to where we want to be? So I have a lot of different ways that I could expand on this or give you other ways of looking at the Superpuzzle. For today, I think we'll keep it here. I would like to hear from you. How do you think about the concept of a Superpuzzle? And if you're familiar with Mark Hamilton's literature, how do you contextualize the real life Superpuzzle? And what do you feel like your role or your contribution is in it? And if you're not familiar with Mark Hamilton's work, I would encourage you to go and check him out on YouTube and social media. Maybe go to neothink.com, get on his newsletter. And if you come to the X space, I'm going to mention some specific things going on. One of the new things that just happened was the launch of basically going in the direction of a nation state and a network state through a project, a new initiative called Immortalis is the name of it. So if you're interested, leave a comment or send a direct message or reach out, and we will get in touch. Or otherwise, just kind of do some digging on your own and see if you can find out. Actually, I'll just go ahead and mention a website you can go to if you want to check out the Immortalis stuff. At this time, you can go to joinimmortalis.com, and I'll just leave it at that. So we're going to jump on to the X space here in a moment. We'll be talking about the overall topic of a Superpuzzle. And I didn't really get into the details at this moment about how the Superpuzzle not only can cure aging and death and why that's so important, but it's basically going to launch your wealth, health, and peace at an individual level as well as at a collective level in a way that most people, probably including myself, can't imagine. And it's nothing that we've ever seen before in this world that we live in here, this shared reality. And that's what our future is. All we have to do is just take it one day at a time, put together the pieces to the puzzle, and eventually we will behold the puzzle picture. So if you want to conceive, believe, and achieve this Superpuzzle of the new mentality and the new world, sooner than later, join us on the X space. We'll be back on Sunday with another Superpuzzle Developments live stream podcast style session. And remember, we have superhuman enhancements on Monday, super society advancements on Wednesday, and super genius breakthroughs on Friday. And it's all connected. The website's still in development at the time of this recording. There's like placeholder text and missing videos and stuff, but you can start to get an idea of some of the things I'm talking about here, what this initiative is all about if you go to supercivilization.xyz. And if you want to get involved with some people like me right now, really easily, go to joinimmortalis.com and see what that part of the Superpuzzle is all about. I'm Joshua Seymour. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you for tuning in to Superpuzzle Developments.